Thank you very much, everybody, for joining, especially on what is the hottest day that we've had so far. So this event is something that we wanted to do as we haven't looked at neurodiversity at all in any of our previous events. So my name's Georgie, and as Mark said, myself and Nolly run the Champions of Diversity workstream within Alpha Challenges, which is a subgroup within E2W. And Mark introduced us to GAIN and also to our wonderful panel that we have tonight. So what we hope to get from this is that we start to put neurodiversity on the D&I agenda, you learn more about it, and we also share some insights as well. I've already posted some resources in the chat for you to take a look at after the call, but I'll hand over to Nolly to introduce herself.
Thank you, Georgie. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. I know today's particularly difficult because it's so sunny, so really appreciate you all being here. Having said that, I am part of the E2W Alpha Challenges, and myself and Georgie regularly post information and also host events regarding various aspects of diversity. Looking forward to discussing this area of diversity because I think it's one that often gets missed out in the conversation. So we are trying to bring awareness and also to further educate ourselves. This particular topic is close to my heart as well because I've got a nephew who's very dear to me, and he is neurodivergent, has struggled in school, and he's leaving school now to go to sixth form. So from my personal view as well, I have a personal interest in today's evening. So saying that, I want to just pass over to our panel today. We've got an amazing panel. And I don't want to waste time, so I will let everyone introduce themselves. And also, if you could just give us a one-liner about your interest in this particular topic. So I will go in alphabetical order, and I'll start with yourself, Alicia. Could you please introduce yourself?
Thank you so much. Really great to see so many people turn up despite the weather. So my name is Alicia Nolkon. And in terms of my background, I spent the last 10 years working in the insurance industry as an actuary in a variety of roles. But as of recently, I have recently changed careers, and I now work as an independent neurodiversity and well-being consultant. And you may think this is quite a big change. And yes, absolutely, it has been. And the reason for it is because last year, just before the first lockdown, after many years of searching and trying to find out what was going on, I received a diagnosis of autism spectrum, or what some of you may have heard as Asperger's syndrome, which is part of the autism spectrum family. So that's what brings me here. And looking back, looking back at my career, there's certainly been things that haven't been helpful, but at the time I didn't quite realize why. And I just want to make sure that others who might also be neurodiverse and want to progress in the workplace, that they get the support that they need and deserve.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alicia. So I'll pass it over to you, Andrew. If you could introduce yourself, please, and let us know your interest in this particular subject.
Sure. Pleased to meet everyone. My name is Andrew Mercer. I'll tell you the two bits of my life, if you like. So at work, I am a IT professional, if you like, and involved in providing technology solutions, all kinds, and that's been my career. I am the father of three boys, and my youngest is on the autism spectrum. And as we learned when he was, I think, 3 years old. And as you might imagine, as a parent, you kind of go through all those emotions. Am I going to sit down and have a conversation with him? And you kind of throw yourself into the research, learn as much as you can about it. What I have learned and what I've seen him, and I can't remember, was it Susan that mentioned this earlier? He's got some amazing strengths. He's particularly good at math, science. He can solve Rubik's cubes. I cannot. All these kind of spatial and skills and interest in technology, hyper focus and so forth. He has challenges too. Going back to my work career, so if you think about the world of technology, the thing that's defining it now is more and more information. Yeah, every device is connected to the internet now, from your fridge to your car. The amount of data is enormous. Cyber, there's all kinds of things. And so what do you need? You need people who can solve really difficult problems, people with hyper focus. So I kind of put two and two together and said, wouldn't it be good to bring some people into my company, BP, with these autistic, neurodiverse, dyslexia, or these skills, because we need these skills amongst the team, not everybody, but amongst the team, to help tackle some of these big challenges we have. And that kind of led to the establishment of a neurodiversity program and hiring, which I'm super proud of. So and hopefully I'm a bit of a better dad. Yeah, lots of positives. And I'll stop there, Nolly. Let Stuart get a word in.
Thank you, Andrew. Stuart, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Nolly. Hi, everyone. Really great to meet everyone. My name's Stuart Pollard. My background is actually in education, so began as a teacher many years ago and became a head teacher of a school that became one of the most inclusive international school, certainly in London, and kind of one of the more inclusive international schools in the world, because we're all connected. I moved out of formal education about 5 years ago to form a non-profit called RQ. And the reason that I moved out was that I saw the change that we have managed to make in the school that I was in, and also saw a lot of change across the education sector in general, and actually saw that the support networks, the inclusivity, the embracing of neurodiversity within schools was much improved in the 2000s leading up to 2015. It went from being at a pretty low ebb to meaning that there were great opportunities and great access for many, not all, learners. What myself and an educational psychologist who I was working with at the time felt was that there was a real drop-off at points of what we would call points of transition. So this would be movement either between schools or from school into non-compulsory education, so university, etc., or into the world of work and independent living. So we formed our non-profit called RQ, and we resolved to work on this area of transitions, develop self-advocacy in individuals, work with organizations to reduce barriers for access. As a result of that work, we work with individuals, families in a very holistic way, individuals, families, organizations, etc. And we also have some crazy ideas about projects that sometimes come off and sometimes don't. And one of the projects that I started talking with someone called Barbara Schonhofer, who works in the insurance industry, a few years ago, was around the idea of creating more inclusive culture, not just within individual companies, but within a whole sector, and that being her sector, the insurance sector. So we had many conversations about it and many kind of meetings over a period, and we weren't sure whether it was going anywhere. And about a year ago, due to a various number of coincidences and serendipity, you could say, we formed a small group that started to really focus on this and see if it was a proposition that could come to fruition. And over the past year, mostly during lockdown, we've grown our what we call our steering committee from initially 4 up to about, I think there are 9 or 10 on the committee now. We've brought in great expertise from a whole variety of areas, both within the insurance sector, within the autism sector, but also within the kind of general business sector as well. And we're starting to gain some traction and moving towards GAIN being formed as a social enterprise, which will be in the next month, will form as a formal entity. And we're now engaging with stakeholders to essentially build our offer. And so, yeah, it's a very exciting point for us because we feel like we're on the cusp of something. And it's great to come here and talk to you guys. What's my interest in this sector? Briefly, I know I've already gone on a little bit. I'm a great believer in changing culture, and I saw in schools how if one brings about a more inclusive culture within a school, that is for the benefit of every individual that comes into contact with that institution. And also, once the culture changes, things actually become easier because things start to, the cogs start to turn, things start to kick in, and you really see, you see real great impact. So GAIN is a long-term project to start change within the insurance sector, but also for essentially for the sector to take this on and for us to initiate some long-term cultural change within the sector. And my personal ambition is that I know nothing about the, well, I know a bit more about the insurance sector now than I did 12 months ago, but my goal is that we model this in the insurance sector and then we scale it into other sectors as well and see it as a model where there are already great pockets of great best practice within individual firms and certain departments, etc. But to see sector-wide change, I think could be, well, it seems very exciting to me, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Stuart, and thank you so much to everyone else on the panel for introducing themselves. So when we were actually preparing for this event, just speaking amongst ourselves, we noticed a few patterns, and then it got us thinking about whether this was just common amongst ourselves or whether this was a wider issue. And so having said that, we'd like to do a poll today just to find out what people actually know about neurodiversity. Is this something that affects you personally? And over the past year, we've had so much conversation about diversity within the workplace, whether that was gender diversity, whether that was ethnic diversity, different aspects of diversity. And we wanted to know whether this was an area or an aspect of diversity that was being missed out in the conversation. So as you can see, Georgie's just put up a poll. So we'd really like you all to get involved and just answer some of the questions regarding what you do know about neurodiversity, whether that's been discussed in your workplaces, and also over the past year, as we're having more and more conversation regarding the issue, is that something that you are all coming across in your day-to-day lives as well?
Brilliant. Thank you all for voting. It looks like we've pretty much got everybody's answers in. And it's really interesting to know our audience, especially with a smaller group as well. So thank you for that. It looks like 50-50 split-ish between the discussions within the workplace and been to events addressing neurodiversity in the past year. And everybody on the call is either neurodivergent or knows someone that is. So yeah, thank you for that. So what we wanted to do first is let's start from the beginning. So what is neurodiversity? Alicia, we'll come to you first, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Georgie. I'll start with an answer that I increasingly see in articles. So one of the versions of what neurodiversity is that you may have seen is, oh, it's a bunch of conditions such as autism, including Asperger's syndrome, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, Tourette's, and that's about it. But that is true, but I think it needs expanding as well. So starting with a term, neurodiversity as a term actually was coined in the late 1990s. So it's been out here for a while by an Australian sociologist, Judy Singer. And what that term means is that there is a diversity of human thinking. There is a diversity of thought and different brain structures. Also, that there isn't a normal type of brain or a standard type of brain or a preferred type of brain. There is a natural variation, much like biodiversity. Having said that, even the author said, it doesn't mean that nature doesn't create bad experiments. As a movement, neurodiversity has been trying to acknowledge that the aforementioned conditions, yes, they do have challenges, but they also come with strengths. And that's something that was the whole idea of the neurodiversity movement. One of the key articles by neurodiversity proponents talked about don't mourn us. You know, I think as neurodiverse person myself, I wouldn't want pity. I do want respect. I do need the support, but I'm more than just challenges, if you like.
Yeah, thank you, Lucia. And hopefully this is somewhere to start to help people to understand what neurodiversity is. But Andrew, coming to you, what do you think common misconception is about neurodiversity or about neurodiverse people?
It's a great, great question. I'll pull on a couple of threads that have been mentioned already. And people will tell me where I get this wrong, because I'm not an expert, but 1 in 7 of the population are kind of neurodiverse. So it's not surprising that we all know someone. And so that kind of rang true for me. And as Alicia says, people who are neurodiverse have got really spiky profiles. So that means they've got weaknesses and strengths, and social skills is often a weakness, and people might need help, in the office, for example, with the kind of unwritten rules of the office, or the kind of what did people really mean when they said that kind of thing. So there's that. Often people who are neurodiverse have got heightened senses, so which can be amazing. The ability to look at a picture and see something in it that no other people can see. I talked about data earlier, the ability to look at a data set and see the exception to the rule. The ability to follow patterns, that kind of hyper focus. There's lots of great case studies as well. I mentioned Heightened Senses. Jo Malone, the perfumery. Jo Malone is neurodiverse. She's got a really acute sense of smell. She can smell things that you and I cannot. So she's turned her special strength, if you like, to create a really successful business. And there's lots of really good examples. So I think, I don't know, the misconception I think I'd say is people don't overlook the special strengths people bring. I'll just throw one more out as marks here. Dyslexic people. If you think about the way the brain kind of has to kind of process reading and so forth, if you're dyslexic, it has to kind of fill in lots of gaps. One of the consequences is dyslexic people are often massively creative. So if you're going to run a marketing campaign, or you're going to try and find a novel solution to a problem, get someone who's dyslexic onto your team. And we can talk about team makeup kind of later. I'm just, if you a lot of building a team is finding people's strengths and playing to them, and neurodiverse people are no exception.
Thank you. And yeah, Andrew, the Jo Malone example that you shared with us when we were prepping for this is something that's stuck with me, and I think it's something we should celebrate and make more people aware that you should just harness the strengths rather than see it as a weakness. And Stuart,
Georgie, great. Sorry,
go ahead.
I was just thinking about. I mean, there are many misconceptions, and I think that it's dangerous in a way that we jump in too much on misconceptions, because clearly many people with good intentions might have misconceptions as well, and so in a way, misconceptions shouldn't always be critiqued. But I think that for me, the one that sticks with me, and this was something that someone told me many years ago, and is now bandied around quite a lot, particularly when talking about autism, is if you've met one individual with autism, you've met one individual with autism. So of course there are traits within all humankind. There are traits and commonalities that we can find, but to feel that there are particular traits within one condition, I think of course we want to celebrate traits and strengths and have a strength-based model, but at the same time we don't want to fall into the trap of assuming that because someone is something, they are something else.
Yeah, completely agree, Stuart. And I think that's something we need to bear in mind. And as we dive more into this conversation as well, learn more about it, because it's something that I was definitely not aware of at all. So thank you.
So I'm happy if the panel is happy to move on to the next part of our discussion today. And one of the things that we realized when we were all speaking amongst ourselves were the challenges that people who are neurodivergent actually experience in the workplace. I know, Andrew, we spoke about how people who are neurodivergent don't always feel comfortable stating that they have unique needs within the workplace, and therefore may not necessarily feel comfortable to speak out and will not get the assistance that they have. How do you think that issue is one that can be resolved?
It's a great point, Nolly. I think this is a recurring pattern with all kinds of diversity. I was listening to a presentation by Lord Brown. Lord Brown was the chief executive of BP for many years, and he resigned because he was gay and he wouldn't admit it, and he was kind of caught, and you know, it's taking, you know, happily, I think the world's moved on, and now people are much more accepting of that. They're much more understanding, and therefore people are much happy to disclose. I don't think that we're at that point yet with some neurodiverse conditions. So you know, I think in the past, you know, even the way neurodiverse conditions have been described, you know, as disorders, autistic spectrum disorder, you know, has kind of led to parents want to keep it under wraps with their children, so children not getting the help they need in the education system. And then at work, I think a lot of people are, you know, fearful that if they disclose, they'll be somehow badly treated or demoted, or, you know, exit the organization at the next restructure, all these kind of things. And then so therefore people mask, they pretend they're normal, and women are particularly good at that. But it places a real emotional burden on them, and stress. It's very stressful, and that doesn't help them bring themselves and do their best at work. So I think you know, it's important for all organizations to organization, society, the education around neurodiversity is really important, because I think with education comes understanding, with understanding comes acceptance, and with acceptance people feel more comfortable to disclose, and on to your point, not only get the support they need, but actually hopefully you know, be able to play to the strengths they often have.
That's brilliant. I think that's very valid, Andrew. I really appreciate that, what you've just said. And I think I want to touch on something that Stuart mentioned earlier slightly, about how sometimes people have good intentions, but may not necessarily, you know, act upon them in the right way. And Alicia, are you able to expand on perhaps the language and the culture that is within, you know, the workplace environment? How can that be cultivated so that people do feel comfortable disclosing, so that those conversations can be had without it being challenging or uncomfortable for both parties?
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, I do think that a lot of it starts with language and education around language, because, you know, it's quite a big thing to disclose because of all the stigma. I do like to think about neurodiversity being similar to the mental health conversation. I think we've now, especially over the past year, we've gotten used to talking about our well-being at work. And, you know, something that I cannot imagine happening a few years back. It was so much more of a taboo, but because we all share this experience, it's been easier to talk about it. And that's not to say that we all had the same experience, absolutely not, but we could imagine the pain of someone else. But neurodiversity is very difficult. You know, it is even what's been already said earlier around, say, the autism spectrum being a spectrum. It's very difficult to just pick an example and say, this is how autistic people look like. This is how they behave. And hey, because of all the masking and camouflaging, sometimes you can't tell. And, you know, you'd think that I would know better, but I still meet so many people some of them that I used to work with, and find out that they are neurodiverse. And the first thought in my head is, are you sure? Can't tell. But, I'm able to catch myself and be like, hang on, this is what my brain tells me, but it's good to be aware. And yes, sometimes you just don't know. And I'd probably say, yeah, language does matter, because no one wants to be called a disorder. I struggled personally very, very much to accept that according to the law, I'm disabled, although not always. It depends on the circumstances. Suppose if I were to say be a sales, work in sales, I'd probably become very quickly disabled. If you put me in a cubicle and ask me to do research, I'll be performing very well. So it's quite difficult. But in terms of language, I'd say there are ways you can educate yourselves around language, and there are better words that you can use. So certainly, instead of a disorder or disability, you can say condition. I think that's a very neutral word, and no one cannot disagree with having a condition. But I think it's about creating that space for that conversation and modeling as well. And I think neurodiversity as a paradigm really provides that space, because we talk about the whole person, the strengths as well as challenges, and it's more of a normalized view rather than a disabled view, if you like.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Alicia, and thank you for sharing especially your personal circumstances as well, your personal experiences, because it's a very difficult, vulnerable topic. So thank you for sharing that with us. So I will pass over to Georgie now.
Yeah, completely. And thanks, Alicia, as well. I guess something that we should think about is what would happen when companies do, or if they do support the neurodiversity of their employees. What are some of the benefits that they can see from that? Which, I mean, talks to why this topic is so important and why we can get it into the businesses. So, Stuart, do you want to give us an idea of what benefits they can start to see as a business? And you're on mute. You were the first one to do it so far. Someone had to.
I might get a prize for that. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, clearly we need to, it's a great question. We need to think about, why are we doing this? So is it just out of the kindness of our hearts, or are there actually some concrete benefits both for individuals and for businesses? And I like to think about a win-win-win. So this would be, I believe there is a win for wider society as a result of creating a more inclusive society, for sure. I think there's a win for businesses, and we'll come to that in a moment, in terms of, having diversity within the teams. And then there's clearly a win for individuals in terms of access to roles that maybe they wouldn't have access to, and also being able to perform maybe when they previously weren't able to perform as well. I think, again, if I base my example in what I really know really well, which is schools, because I've seen it happen and seen it take place, I think that I want to touch on a couple of points we talked about already. So first of all, you've got the idea of whether or not someone is diagnosed, or, well, okay, let's go back, even whether or not they have any acknowledgement, either themselves or their colleagues, of that there's a difference. That creates a barrier in itself, because immediately, if your colleagues, whoever they happen to be, peers, are thinking there's something up, I can't work out what it is, and it's not okay to talk about it, then that creates an unhealthy working environment. And we all know that if there's an unhealthy working environment, productivity is reduced, well-being at work is reduced. On every level, it's a lose-lose-lose rather than a win-win-win. In terms of getting a diagnosis, so after acknowledgement, either of the self or of others, getting a diagnosis, the fact that question marks remain about whether or not it's a good thing to get a diagnosis. I mean, I think we should look at that as a society, or within our organizations, and have a good think about that, and why that's the case still in 2020. I had a conversation with someone this week or last week about their child, and it was as to whether or not for schools they should get an educational healthcare plan, which means that's essentially what used to be called a statement. It's the plan that basically should give you access to resources within the education sector. You'd have thought a brilliant thing. The parent I spoke to wasn't sure about doing it because he was worried that it could put his child on a particular pathway that he didn't want his child to go along, potentially being marginalized from mainstream education. Now, I know I'm talking about education, but again, within the work environment, if people have that anxiety about declaring or about their diagnosis, again, it can't be a healthy situation. So that brings us back to the benefits. So what are the benefits for the individual? I mean, it's clearly about being able to be yourself in the workplace, being able to do the things that you're best at, working in ways and in areas in which you can actually give best value both to yourself as an individual and be valued, but also to a company as well. There's a quote: if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life thinking it's stupid, and the people around it will as well. So I think it's about finding the right fit for individuals. Now, that's great to do that with the identified neurodiverse individuals within an organization, and of course that can have some benefits for an organization. But I think if we think about the wider benefits, once that conversation started, other people who haven't disclosed or are not sure about something, they'll feel able to start to have that conversation with colleagues, with their line managers, etc. So that conversation will be taking place industry-wise. And in addition, there is a whole spectrum. We are all different in our way. And the fact is that if firms are able to cater towards difference of any type, it could be to do with intersectionality in the kind of more formally identified areas of diversity, but it could also be whether or not you like sitting next to a sunny window or whether you like staring at a blank wall. If everybody starts to be seen as an individual and their preferences and the ways in which they work best and most effectively are taken into account, I've seen it in schools, what you would call the productivity of schools, which is, I believe, learning. It increases massively for the whole community. So I think there's a massive impactful difference to organizations. And I've just picked up on some kind of one area, but you could go out into a number of different areas with that as well.
Yeah, completely. And like you said, having an inclusive culture lets people be productive and be themselves. So yeah, without a doubt. And Andrew, I know that we talked a little bit about the benefits of having cognitive diversity within your teams. So do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that, please?
I'll be glad to, Georgie. So, well, you kind of know what happens in many cases when someone goes out to hire a new member of staff for their team. They generally look for someone they can relate to or understand, and often they end up having someone very similar to themselves. And if you think about it, if you've got a team full of people who are like you, well, that's kind of nice. Yeah, it's easy. My job's done as a supervisor. I've got a nice, easy life now. But when your team's faced with a particular challenge, you're not going to have particularly strong skills to solve that challenge. Essentially, you're as good as a supervisor is you've kind of only got the strength that you bring, because everyone else is kind of like you or a more junior version of you. The smart thing as a supervisor is to realize what you're good at and what you're not. And if you're particularly not good at finishing tasks, you want to hire someone who's really diligent at that. If you are very creative and you don't like following process, you might want to hire someone who's really good at that. If you are not particularly creative, you might want to hire someone who's got 1,000 ideas. And this is the kind of cognitive diversity that makes teams really strong. And it's a harder job probably as a supervisor, but a much more powerful team. So I think that part of the education for all of us, everyone who's in business, is to understand the kind of strengths that a team needs to have, and to be inclusive of different personality types, including neurodiverse personality types, to bring those strengths to bear. And business is only becoming more competitive, and I talked earlier about information technology and data becoming cyber threats. There's loads of examples where, frankly, you need diverse people on your team, otherwise you're not going to be able to solve the challenges of the future. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. It's a bit of a risk for a supervisor, but I think well worth the reward.
Yeah. Thank you for pointing out, Andrew. I think it is extremely important that we all appreciate that. I like to look at it as, and I've heard Holly Tucker, who's the founder of Not on the High Street, she's often said the fact that she's neurodivergent is like a superpower. And so you've spoken about how that can be harnessed once people are in the teams, within teams, but how do you think that organizations can make that part of their culture? Because we know that culture is not necessarily tangible, but it's something that is felt, something that is sensed, it's something that people perceive when they're in the working environment. How do you think that can be embedded and cultivated within the work culture to make it more comfortable for individuals who are neurodivergent?
That's a great question. So I think we've touched on it a little bit already. I think it starts with awareness and talking about it and raising, perhaps it's education, but did you know the strengths that someone with dyslexia may bring, or the strengths that someone with ADHD may bring? Lots of very, very successful chief executives, by the way, have got ADHD. They're very good at big picture and compartmentalizing risk. Richard Branson, for example. The strengths that autistic people bring in terms of data and focus, following process, and I think it's, so my experience, I kind of led some of that in BP, and it's kind of, and I told the story about my son. It's remarkable the number of people who said, I've got a neurodiverse son or daughter, or and then the number of people that said, I'm neurodiverse, and this is what I bring to the workplace. And actually it's as you would expect, 1 in 7 of the population. Yeah. You're going to have a lot of that. So I think anyone who's interested in starting that conversation will soon find that there's a lot of people who are very supportive, and the ability to move it forward is, it just starts with the conversation. I thoroughly recommend that.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Andrew. And Stuart, could you elaborate on that a bit? I know obviously with the work that you do, you work a lot with students, but it feels like there's a lot of support within the schools if one has, as you said, a statement or a diagnosis, but as people advance into the workplace, how do you think that can be accommodated as well?
I think it's a really interesting area, and I think we shouldn't take the word culture lightly. I think there's research that suggests that it takes about 7 years to change the culture of an organization, whatever that means. But it takes a long time to bring about cultural change. That movement from that transition into the workplace and how that can affect culture. I think one of the areas that I focus a lot with the young people that I work alongside is the idea of self-advocacy. So that is about skilling them up. Then, in fact, it's about them skilling themselves up and having an awareness of what they can do, what they struggle with, what they need support with, and what accommodations and adjustments they need in place. If they can walk into, and I've worked with young people who do this, they can walk into an interview or into a workplace and say, I can do this job, but in order to be able to do it, I would benefit from this, and this. And often they're very, very small adjustments. That's an incredibly powerful message. And in most cases, employers are very receptive to the message. The problems come up when there isn't disclosure, when there isn't disclosure of when people aren't able to advocate for themselves, and therefore employers who are not trained to pick up on these things don't know what to do, and it causes problems, etc. So when individuals are able to advocate for themselves, that's a big step for me in terms of cultural change. But I would echo what Andrew says as well, which is that we've got to take it step by step, and we're probably not ready for everyone to self-advocate at this point when the conversation is only just beginning. And I see that, a meeting such as this, an event such as this, is a great way of bringing about that culture. And I'm not suggesting that people do this, but for example, if everyone from this meeting went into a meeting tomorrow morning, because I'm sure we're all in some form of meeting tomorrow at some point, and discuss what we're discussing now around neurodiversity, I would be pretty certain that over half those conversations would lead to people disclosing that they either know someone or they have a connection or whatever that you didn't know about before, because these conversations aren't, it's not top of the agenda. Neurodiversity isn't top of the agenda. We happen to think again that the time is probably right, that it's the next frontier in terms of diversity. But I think that there is, in terms of this cultural change, it's about starting the conversation. And what we're doing again is starting to community build. So we're building a safe community where people feel safe to have these conversations. And then from there, we will build. But we can't build until we've created the safe foundations first.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Stuart. I think that's what you've just said is extremely important. And I think what's particularly important to note as well about neurodiversity is that it is, everybody has intersectionality as well. So when we're talking about whether it's ethnicity, neurodiversity, it doesn't discriminate. So it covers people from different backgrounds, from different ethnicities, whether male or female or whatever it is. So I think it's extremely important that we also bring it up in those conversations as well, rather than it just being an isolated aspect of diversity, because where there's intersectionality, male, female, as I pointed out, there's a lot of room for crossover. So Alicia, speaking about that intersectionality and, having conversations in the workplace, you mentioned earlier, people now having conversations about mental health. How do you think as an individual, in the workplace, they can approach, you're able to approach managers, seniors in the workplace to say, put up your hands and say, look, this is the challenge I have. And how do you think people can self-advocate in the workplace?
That's a great question. I'd love to say that all you need to do is disclose and the workplace will do what they can to support you, but it doesn't work like that. Partly because I think, people in HR departments, they already have so much on and so many different diversities to grasp that knowledge isn't there around neurodiversity. And if there is, again, some of the experiences that I've heard of is, yes, perhaps someone from HR will go through sort of checklist, get an occupational therapist involved, do an assessment and case closed. I think it really comes down to two things. One is self-advocacy, as Stuart said, and that, you need so much self-awareness around it, and you need to have these conversations. So one of the things I did, shortly I got my diagnosis, started to learn more about the topic. Within my team, I did this workshop that looked into our individual preferences, and I got this idea from Ultranauts, which are a US company. They employ around 75% of employees that are on the autistic spectrum, and that came from and that was an idea that came from one of the employees. It was basically what they thought is, there's so many people around there. How do I best work with them? And also I want them to respect my communication preferences. Wouldn't it be easier if they just knew? If they go have a project with me and they just know what my preferences are. Magic, right? So that was also actually a really interesting workshop. I got a lot of pushback, maybe not pushback. The team were a little bit like, I don't know, what's the point? But okay, you can do it. And I think we were all really amazed. I think at the time I was in the team for over 2 years. So we were quite a small team as well, 4 people. So we knew each other quite well. And yet we learned so much more. And in my case, for example, something that I thought everyone thought, or maybe no one cared about, was the noise levels. I have an extreme sensitivity to noise. So partly I'm really happy to see that anyone that is not speaking is off mute. That really makes my anxiety levels go down. But I just didn't realize that people are not bothered by noise. And guess what? One of the team members, he actually said he needs that stimulation. He couldn't work in a place where there's no noise at all. So I think having these conversations around preferences and making it a daily thing, making it something that is normal, not because you have a label, but just because you're a human being and we want to make the most out of you. That's it. Again, it's probably not the easiest thing to do in the short term, but I think it's just so much benefits to reap from that approach.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's well said. And do you feel that generally management are equipped to deal with those conversations? Or do you think we're still a long way from educating even people who manage groups of people into understanding and having, the language, the resources to, even when they are approached, to actually be productive in those conversations?
I think we're at the very, very start of the journey. There's certainly more education that needs to be done. I think, at least the experience I've had, and again, I worked in a fantastic team. People wanted to support me, but they just didn't know how. And I didn't know at the time what I needed either. So that was a really difficult thing to break through. I'd probably say my advice to any team managers is be curious and don't be afraid to simply ask for more information. You don't have to know. You don't, and I think it's fine. Just be curious and ask about experiences. How does that affect you? In an ideal world, how would you set up your working environment? And learn from that. Think again about the person and how they can work most productively.
Thanks. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
Sorry, Stuart, can I ask a question here? And I'm conscious of the time, and it would be nice to get some questions in. Stuart and Alicia, you talk very much about need, and but identifying need is one aspect, but identifying strengths is another. Stuart, you said an autistic person going into an interview and telling the interviewer what their needs are. Do we also spend as much time in finding out what those strengths are? The Rubik's Cube. I would love to go into an interview and say, I'm absolutely brilliant at this and I'm going to blow your socks off, but you're going to have to put me in a quiet corner.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I think the thing that I mentioned was that, what we try and work on is, for people to go into that space. I mean, I'm talking a very literal sense here, and it may not be exactly like this, but to go into space and say, I can do this job because of this, but I need this in order to be able to do the job. And I was just reflecting on that as Alicia was talking as well, and thinking about what bosses and employers and recruiters can do to support this. And I think, of course, it's great if everyone can self-advocate and walk into a room and say, I need this and this, I can do this. But let's face it, as human beings, most of us, whether we're neurodiverse or not, most of it, that's not our kind of default way in which we work. We're sensitive to the way in which we present. So really what we need as well is we need to have environments where people can say that, or where they're asked that, where they're asked, what helps you to work best? What can you do best? And what is it that we can do to help you work to your best ability? So of course, disclosing and saying saying what your strengths are and what your needs are is great, but actually let's create environments where you don't need to go in and say that, where you're asked in advance.
I'll offer a build as well to Stuart. You did that really well. People, again, if you think about a team structure, it's not just about the manager being successful, it's about all of the team being successful and all of the team working to their maximum contribution. And there's a management philosophy called servant leadership, where the leader's job actually is to make sure the team are as successful and as productive as they possibly can be, every individual member of the team. And that approach leads you to understanding the individuals and understanding their strengths and understanding what they need to be successful and clearing obstacles out the way so they can be the best that they possibly can. So it's as Alicia says, this is the journey we're on. But there's hope. I'm an optimist.
If I may add as well, I think there's plenty of strengths, but I think something also to appreciate is that sometimes strength can also be the biggest weakness. It really depends on the environment. And I'll give you one example, which is because I have such great attention to detail, I always pick all the little bits, all the minor things. I'm a great proofreader, which probably is a really great strength if I need to review an annual report that goes to shareholders. You definitely want me on my team, but you wouldn't really be sending me lots of sort of internal presentations to review. And it's not because I'm trying to show off or anything. I just can't help it. I can't unsee what I see. And there were situations in my life where I really felt like I wish I couldn't see these things, because people then think, or maybe I thought, oh, do they think I'm picky or something, So I think it really comes down to that fit to the environment, fitting the person to the team, and sort of shaping the role to the person, not the other way around.
I can just vouch for that. If you want something gone through with a fine-tooth comb, you send it to Alicia.
Definitely. If you don't, you can send it to me, but you tell me it's just high level. Otherwise, I'll go into my sort of standard mode.
So what we're going to do now is we'll open up for Q&A. So if you feel comfortable, please feel free, raise your hand and come off mute. Or if you would prefer, write in the chat box. You can do it directly to me or to everybody, and we'll pick up. So while people think of their questions, I will ask one that I think, Stuart, you might be able to answer. So within organisations, there's a lot of affinity groups. So for us, we have Women IHS Market or Empower for ethnic minorities. If people don't have a network or any support for neurodiversity in the workplace, how can they go about setting one up?
I mean, I'm not entirely sure. I think that again, if the conversation, starting the conversation is where everything begins. So the conversation needs to take place. And again, my suspicion is that once the conversation starts, there'll be a lot of advocates within firms, within the industry, cross-industry as well. So I think that would be the starting point. It's a great question. And I think that one of the answer is that it's connected to why we formed GAIN in the first place, was that we felt that there wasn't really a standard answer for organizations that were looking for answers in this field. Of course, they can work with their D&I team and develop in those areas and look at Nolly, you mentioned intersectionality. Of course, you can make connections there, but to actually be a voice for neurodiversity itself, it's hard, because you're starting from nothing, and in a way you need an I'm absolutely not promoting GAIN here, even though we're here to talk about GAIN, but to have an organization, we're hoping that having an organization like GAIN gives organizations that will be already doing some great best practice already, will be able to hook into, but also others who are really at the start of their journey will be able to join and share experience and find out what best practice is across the board. And again, so if an organization like GAIN doesn't exist, then I would suggest that having conversations will be the way forward, because that will start to see what's going on, because there will be things going on across the sector, I'm sure, already. Yeah,
and build it organically.
Yeah.
And Mark, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no. So Jane, you talked at the very start about bringing more neurodiversity into your firm. Where are you with that, and what help do you need if you're still there? Sounds like she's gone quiet.
I'll add to the last question very quickly, because I have set up a neurodiversity team. There's probably a couple of elements to creating any group in a company. So if you talk about it, as I mentioned, people soon put their hand up and say, "Oh, me too, me too." So there's an element of, yeah, this is real, and 1 in 7 and so forth. And there's probably a business case as well. The business case in terms of capability, the business case in terms of inclusion, and And I think if you kind of couple the kind of heart and the head and take that to senior leadership, it'd be really hard for them not to back you, frankly, creating a business resource group. So I think it's quite doable. If I can do it, anyone can do it, yeah.
Thanks, Andrew. Susan, did you want to ask a question?
I thought that maybe somebody had asked a question. My daughter had run in just while we were talking, so I don't know if, Mark, did you ask me a question?
No, Susan, but I'd be interested in your thoughts on tonight's session and particularly with your brother, wasn't it?
Yeah. It has been a very wonderful opportunity to listen to this panel. It's given me some thoughts on maybe how to get him to start advocating for himself. Because he wasn't diagnosed until he was an adult, but he had trouble all through school. And even now, I think he struggles with the very kind of, just a little background. I live in the rural South, or my family lives in the rural South of the United States. And there's some very backwards thinkings about neurodiversity, and as well as many other things. And so the idea that you're different is not well accepted at times. And so asking for what you need to be successful can be a challenge. So I've been trying to have conversations with him in a way that he can hear me about advocating for himself at the community college he's at, and getting the resources he needs, whether a part of Asperger's syndrome is that fine motor skills can be not so good. And his are particularly not so good. So his handwriting is really hard to read. So getting somebody who could take notes for him, maybe even just providing him a laptop, just something that gets him to where he can function successfully.
Thank you, Susan.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My son has a laptop at school, Susan, so it's not. What I'd say is, I'm guessing at Alabama or Louisiana, which I've visited both, but there's actually some really progressive organisations in the US as well. There's the Autism at Work group, which you can Google. Stanford University, which you can Google. There's loads. You're blessed in the country you're in. I'd say there's lots of great.
We are. I have noticed, and this is just a personal observation, that most of the Eventbrite, or even just events period through LinkedIn or Eventbrite or wherever, most of them for neurodiversity are hosted by the UK. So you guys are
okay
in that area, because I've been struggling to find things in my time zone.
Well, you found us, Susan. So good.
That's great.
Yeah.
Jane, you're at the beginning you just mentioned briefly that you were looking to make your firm more neurodiverse in some shape, form or another. Do you want to share where you are on the journey, or what your thoughts are, or indeed what you've learned tonight?
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry, I was struggling with my headphones, so I didn't get a chance to answer your question before. So Blue Bay Asset Management is, we're part of Royal Bank of Canada, and we have signed up, I believe we signed up to GAIN for the internship program, which is really exciting. We also were a charity partner. In fact, I was a charity partner, as chair of the charity committee for a charity called PIP, which is Pursuing Independent Paths, and that is for children with severe learning and physical disabilities. And we actually had them come in and intern with about 3 of them, I think we did, over the last couple of years to come and intern with us. So I think there's been some great learnings that are going on in terms of sort of support in the community. What I would like to see next is how do we live and breathe it within the firm amongst our staff and in through our recruitment. So I think that's definitely a development point for us there.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you.
Okay, so I think in the interest of time, if there are any other questions, we'll go back to the panel and just say for your closing comments, if there's one call to action or one thing that you'd like people to take away from the event, what would it be? So Stuart, I'll throw you in the deep end first and you can go.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, so much, but I think I'll go back to the point that I said I wouldn't suggest, but actually I would suggest it. You know, I would suggest one call to action is tomorrow during a meeting, if you get a chance, when you're having those couple of minutes before the meeting gets going, or those couple of minutes at the end, have a conversation about what we've been talking about this evening and your thoughts about this evening, and share them with colleagues, and you know, see what happens as a result of that, because I would suggest that in many cases that there'll be an outcome of that happening. So yeah, talk about it tomorrow.
Thank you. And Alicia, do you want to go ahead, please?
Yes, thank you. I'd probably say be curious and do one thing to learn more about it. It's such a fascinating topic. Georgie put a few resources into the chat, some videos and some written resources. So give it a go, and yeah, just be curious and learn more about it. I'm still learning so much more about it every day.
Thank you. And Andrew.
Great advice from Stuart and Alicia. I'd certainly support start the conversation. You know, in your team, in your work group, it will raise awareness, and I think, you know, after awareness, all will come good things. So you know, for people who are neurodiverse, people who are building teams for the organisation. So I think, yeah, just start that conversation. I think it'd be brilliant.
Thank you. It was some really great advice, and yeah, thank you so much for being on our panel tonight. It's really opened my eyes, and something that I've taken away personally is that we really don't talk about the positives enough. It's always on the negative when it comes to neurodiversity. So that's something I'm definitely going to take away. So thank you. Nolly, do you have anything else you want to add?
I think Mark was going to go. Mark, did your hand just go up?
Yeah, it did, Nolly. Thank you very much. Alicia, Stuart and Andrew are, along with myself and a number of other people, are working with this fantastic organisation called GAIN Together. Jane, it's probably not the same GAIN that you talked about that Blue Bay are involved with. Look us up, find us, come and join us, get involved, either as an individual or with your firms. This is such an important topic. It's often overlooked, and we need your help and support to move the dial in this area. So do come along and find us on the internet, or go to the E2W website, and there's a link to it to GAIN at this event. Sorry, thank you. That was a sales pitch.
It's really good. And the little secret, just everyone knows, the reason Mark put his hand up so superbly is because Mark's very good at catching things.
No.
Right, on that note, it's been It's been an absolutely lovely evening. It's been lovely having the panel and organising this event. Leading up to it, we had some really important and very interesting conversation. And I'm so thankful that we've had so many people turn up today. We were all very doubtful because of the lovely weather. We weren't too sure if everyone was going to sacrifice the sunshine just to join us. So thank you for joining today. I think for myself, what I will say, the last sort of remark for myself is, let's think about what are the symbols for neurodiversity. So when we think World AIDS Day, we always think about the red ribbon. When we think breast cancer, it's the pink ribbon. When we think mental health, it's the green one. But when we talk about neurodiversity, what is it? What's the symbolism? What's the week? We have so many weeks. We've got the Macmillan morning. But I feel like the fact that it doesn't automatically come to mind, the colors and the symbolism, means that we're not talking about this enough. So I think for all of us, we have a duty to go out to our workplaces and at least, even for a week in the year minimum, try and raise awareness and try and promote that at least when they think about neurodiversity, certain things come to mind. And from there, we can start to, that can be the foundation for the conversation. On that note, thank you all for joining us today. And yeah, round of applause for the virtual panel. And enjoy the rest of your evening. And hopefully you'll join us our next event.